The American dream of owning a cabin has been dying slowly in the places you've been told to look. While investors are fighting over $800,000 sheds in Colorado with composting toilets, there is a second market, one where $75,000 still buys you a 2-bedroom on 3 acres with a view. After looking across all 50 states, we've managed to find the states where buying cabins still makes sense in 2026. Tennessee, a classic tax arbitrage state, but the cabin market has a trapdoor, and it's called the Smokies. Cabins situated near the Great Smoky Mountains. On paper, Tennessee looks like it should be a cheap cabin, but the state is closer to national pricing than people expect. The typical home value sits at $324,926. That's a gap of $32,519 from the average home value. It's not the giant discount you see in the true last affordable frontier states, but the reason Tennessee still makes the list is that the math can work if you shop it like a spreadsheet. The Smokies are one of the most discovered cabin markets in the country, so the pretty area often prices like a luxury product. The smarter move is to treat the Smokies as the trophy zone and look for value in less hyped pockets like the Cumberland Plateau, where the price is less distorted by nonstop tourist demands. Tennessee is attractive, though, because the property tax rate is listed at around 0.46%, which is low enough that it doesn't punish you for owning. On a $150,000 cabin, the math is simple again. That would be $1,500. So 0.46% is a little less than half of that, which lands at about $690 per year, which sounds very fair. Tennessee does not levy a broad personal income tax, and the old tax on interest and dividends was relapsed for tax periods beginning on January 1st, 2021 or later. That's why Tennessee keeps attracting movers who want their paychecks to stretch further without needing an exotic loophole. Insurance is the line item you still respect. The average premium for policy with a $300,000 dwelling is listed around $2,672 per year, which comes to $223 per month. Not cheap, but it's not catastrophic either, and it stays manageable when your purchase price is disciplined. Tennessee works best for buyers who want tax arbitrage with workable carrying costs, and who understand the winning strategy is avoiding price traps, while still staying close enough to real infrastructure to live like a modern person. Missouri is the sleeper pick in the 2026 cabin map because it doesn't win one category by a mile. It wins because the whole ownership stack stays reasonable at the same time. Zillow's Home Value Index puts Missouri's typical home value at $253,654, which is nice because it preserves normal people price instead of forcing you into Trophy Town the moment you type the word cabin into a search bar. From here, the tax is manageable. Missouri's effective property tax rate is 0.85%, so again, on a $150,000 cabin, you're looking at roughly $1,275 per year in baseline property taxes, which is not the lowest in the country, but it also isn't the kind of number that punishes you just for owning land. According to analysis from trusted sources, insurance is an average premium of $2,191 per year, which is not cheap, but it's also not Oklahoma-level pain. And that middle lane number is often the difference between a cabin that feels like a fun asset and a cabin that quietly turns into a financial anchor. Unfortunately, Missouri's best cabin pockets near major lake corridors and tourism gravity are getting discovered. So the edge is buying just outside the obvious zone, so you keep demand access without paying trophy pricing. The typical home value sits at $250,331, and the Upper Peninsula can come in cheaper than the state average depending on the county and the level of rustic you're willing to live with. Which is why hunting camp culture is still a real thing up here, not just a nostalgic aesthetic. The issue is that Michigan does not let you live in the fantasy that the purchase price is the whole story. It is the kind of state where you might buy cheap, but you still pay to exist. The property tax math is the first wake-up call. The effective property tax rate is listed around 1.08%, which is high relative to the low tax cabin states. On a $150,000 cabin, 1% is only $1,500, Add on an extra 0.08%, which is another $120. So you're sitting around $1,620 per year in baseline property tax. Cheap purchases price feel good on closing day, but high annual taxes can turn an affordable cabin into a slow, monthly leak that never stops. Insurance, surprisingly, is not the main villain. The average premium for a policy with $300,000 in dwelling coverage is listed around $2,368 per year, which is only $197 a month. A middle lane number compared to the states where climate risks has turned insurance into a budget crisis. The bigger carrying cost is maintenance, and the up is where the cost becomes a lifestyle. Winter is not a season here, it is a project that lasts for months. And if you buy a cabin in the Upper Peninsula, you are signing up for real winterization responsibilities. Reliable heat systems, snow management, monitoring roof flow during heavy snowfall, protecting plumbing from freeze damage, and accepting the contractors and repair crews are not always available instantly when the weather turns. Even mainstream insurance guidances flags Michigan's northern winters as a major factor for homeowners, and anyone who lives through these kinds of winters knows why. The cabin doesn't just sit there quietly, waiting for summer. This, however, is the trade. You get serious nature access, lakes, forests, and solitude at price points that are harder to find elsewhere. But you pay with high property taxes and the winter tax of constant upkeep and preparation. Alabama sits there with property taxes so low it feels like a loophole, and that's why it shows up on every cabin affordability spreadsheet. The typical home value in Alabama is $228,634, and that gap matters because it keeps the entry price from immediately turning into a lifestyle flex that only works for high earners. Low base values also tend to keep the ownership stack from spiraling too fast. But the real reason Alabama pops on the math side is the tax bite. The effective property tax is listed around 0.41%, and the easiest way to understand that is to translate into an annual bill. On a cabin at $150,000, 1% would be $1,500, so 0.41 is a little over 2/5 of that, which lands at roughly $615 per year. That is the kind of number that turns owning a second place from fantasy into something you can actually carry without stress, because your annual tax bill is not quietly chewing through your budget in the background. Alabama also has a real retiree angle, but it's only useful if you keep it precise. The state's revenue department lists multiple categories of income that are exempt from Alabama income tax, including Social Security benefits and several forms of retirement income like military retirement pay and certain payments from defined benefit plans. The important part is that these exemptions are category specific, so you don't assume everything is exempt, but because you heard Alabama is retiree friendly, you verify what kind of retirement income you actually have, because the rules treat different streams differently. That is the version that keeps you out of trouble and keeps the script honest. The internet is generally workable, with statewide averages sitting at around 191.88 megabits per second, which is enough for modern life in many areas. But rural performance can vary sharply. If your plan involves remote work, you still do address level verification before you commit, because cheap land is not a win if it forces you into unreliable service or constant workarounds. The bigger catch is that low property tax does not automatically mean low carrying costs. Homeowners insurance averages around $3,114 per year for a policy with $300,000 in dwelling coverage, which is about $259 a month, and that number is high enough that you treat it like a core part of the deal, not a footnote. Alabama's cabin math is strong on taxes, but you still underwrite climate exposure, especially storms and flooding risks in some regions. You also account for practical reality that the cheapest counties can come with longer drives for healthcare, tradespeople, and basic services. Alabama works best for retirees who can benefit from the state's exempt income categories and want a low tax ownership base, and for budget buyers who want the monthly number to stay calm even if rates move, as long as they pick a value zone that still keeps them within reach of real infrastructure. Kentucky is the county-level cheat code state because the headline numbers are already cheap, and in the right pockets can get downright surreal. On the statewide baseline, the typical home value sits at $224,468. Kentucky is the kind of place where Pareto's 80-20 rule actually shows up on a map. You drill down into the right counties and the pricing starts to look like a different decade. Wolf County is the most viral example, and the federal survey estimates backups the general idea. Its median value of owner-occupied housing units is listed at only $75,800 in the latest 5-year estimate window from 2020 to 2024. That is not a Zillow fantasy number. It's a published survey estimate, and it explains why Kentucky keeps producing "How is this real?" cabin stories. The property tax rate is listed at 0.77% in a nationwide state-by-state table. On a $150,000 cabin, the baseline property tax is easily translated to roughly $1,155 per year. The biggest punch in Kentucky is carrying costs through insurance. The average annual premium for a policy with $300,000 in dwelling coverage is listed around $3,540, or $295 a month. That is also before you've budgeted for maintenance, utilities, or any upgrades. That number makes sense once you remember Kentucky's weather profile is not gentle. Strong summer storms and severe weather are real factors. Winter brings freezing temperatures and snow or ice in many areas. Flood risks is meaningful enough that state resources actively push residents to check flood maps and understand exposure risks. The value move here is not buying the absolute cheapest listing, it's buying the cheapest one that stays livable through the seasons, sits within reasonable distance of healthcare and reliable tradespeople, and doesn't trap you in a permanent repair limbo. Kentucky is for buyers who are willing to go county by county until they find the 20% of places where the value concentrates, and for people who want serious outdoor access while still keeping the price base under the national average. Zillow's Home Value Index puts Arkansas typical home value at $215,426. Against the national average, that's a $142,019 gap. And it's not a rounding error. It changes your entire budget because when all the base value is lower, the stuff that sits on top of ownership tends to come in lower too. Where Arkansas becomes genuinely interesting is the retiree toolkit. The Arkansas Department of Finance and Administration explains that if you are 65 or older or disabled and you purchase a homestead, the taxable assessed value of the residence can be frozen at the next assessment after purchase. That's a structural mechanism to slow the creep of carrying costs over time. With one key reality check, your tax bill can still move if mileage rates change or if you add improvements. Arkansas's income tax regulations state that Social Security benefits are excluded from gross income for state income tax purposes. Oklahoma is where buying a cabin means you print money or it burns you alive. The deciding factor is not the mortgage rate, it is insurance, because insurance is the carrying cost that doesn't care how good your deal felt on closing day. The home value index of the average Oklahoma is pegged at $214,159, so Oklahoma is still operating in a price lane that makes entry-level cabin ownership feel possible for normal budgets, not just trophy markets. The price gap is why investors keep circling places like Broken Bow and other high-demand gateway pockets. The buy-in can be approachable compared to national pricing, and the upside looks seductive if you're thinking in short-term rental cash flow. Now the headline risk: bank rate is blunt. Oklahoma is the most expensive state in the research for homeowners insurance, with an average premium of $4,695 per year, which they note is far above the national average for the same coverage levels. This is the reality check that changes the entire investor playbook. High insurance doesn't just shrink profit, it raises your break-even occupancy for short-term rentals, and it makes vacant months hurt more, because the meter keeps running whether the cabin is booked or not. The pricing is apparently tied to Oklahoma's exposure to tornadoes and strong winds, and the flooding risks in parts of the state. Oklahoma can still be a win for investors who can command strong nightly rates and price insurance into the deal, and for remote workers who want a solid internet and don't mind paying the climate risk premium. It'd be a nice place to have your little cabin all to yourself. Mississippi is the most honest cabin state in America, because the spreadsheet gives you a gift and then demands you read the fine print. The typical home value sits at $186,295. The starting price is simply lower, and lower entry pricing changes what is possible for buyers who feel locked out of the cabin dream everywhere else. The ownership math stays readable for normal people, and it starts with taxes. The effective property tax rate is listed at 0.64%, so on a $150,000 cabin, the baseline property tax comes out to roughly $960 per year. That is a manageable annual bill compared to the state where property taxes are a second rent payment. The internet is not a problem either. Average download speeds sit around 187 megabits per second, which is workable for remote life in plenty of areas. But the rule is the same as every rural state. You don't buy a cabin on state averages. You test the address because one neighborhood can be fine and the next a nightmare. Where Mississippi stops being a free win is carrying costs. The average annual premium for a policy with $300,000 in dwelling coverage is listed around $3,353 per year or $279 a month. That is unfortunately high enough that you do feel it. Mississippi's cabin is not cheap and done. It's cheap to buy, not always cheap to hold. Because insurance can quietly drag the deal into a monthly obligation that feels heavier than the purchase price suggested. This is where smart buyers win. You run the full monthly numbers before you fall in love with the land. And you price insurance as a core pillar of the deal, not an afterthought. Mississippi does offer a real retirement tax perk, but you keep it precise. The state tax agencies state that the Social Security benefits are not taxable, and that retirement income such as pensions and annuities, in generally, do not subject to state income tax if plan requirements are met. That is real cost control for retirees, especially when combined with the state's low entry pricing. But according to the Commonwealth Fund's State Health System scorecard data, Center shows Mississippi ranked number 51 overall in its 2025 State Health System Performance Ranking. This is in fact dead last in the scorecard's overall measure. If you have any chronic health needs, or you are retirement age and you need consistent access to care, the low cost is not automatically a win. It can be a gamble. And the honest version is that you plan around the reality, or you choose another state. Mississippi is for buyers who want the lowest entry pricing and can manage risk intelligently, and for people who are flexible and healthy enough that healthcare access is not the dominant variable driving their quality of life. Finally, West Virginia, the place that happens when the cabin market splits into two realities, and you choose the side where the spreadsheet still smiles back. Zillow places the average West Virginia home value at $168,318, while the average U.S. home value sits at $357,445. This gap is why West Virginia keeps showing up in every shockingly affordable cabin conversation. Now, for the part most cabin videos skip, the real enemy is not just the purchase price, it is the carrying cost, and West Virginia stays unusually sane on the biggest line item. West Virginia, effective property tax rate sits at 0.5%. So going back to our $150,000 cabin example, the math is simple, that's $750 per year. If you are coming from high tax states where the same cabin value gets hit harder every single year, that's a good deal. And yes, counties can vary. But the state level signal is clear. West Virginia does not punish ownership the way the usual suspects do. The honesty check is on the internet. High-speed internet stakes ranking put West Virginia's average download speed at 164.8 megabits per second, placing it in their list of the slowest states. This does not mean remote work is impossible. It means you have to shop like a remote worker, not like a weekend tourist. Verify service at the exact address, and don't let scenic listing descriptions make the decision for you. The good news? Insurance math is calmer than people expect. According to reports, West Virginia homeowners pay on average $1,047 per year on a $300,000 in dwelling coverage, when the national average for the same coverage level is $2,424 per year, meaning West Virginia is meaningfully below the national baseline. Then there's also the Ascend WV, a talent attraction program that pays remote workers $12,000 over 2 years in equal monthly installments, and if you buy a home during the program, you can accelerate the remaining payments into a lump sum after home purchase verification. So the catch is not hidden fees, it is logistics. Some of the best cabin counties also come with thinner service density, longer drives, or specialized care, fewer contractor options, and slower timelines when something breaks. West Virginia works best for people who want a low-cost base camp, who can confirm the internet before they commit, and who want the kind of ownership math that still makes sense in 2026. That is everything. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and click the like and share buttons below while you're at it. Also, feel free to check for other videos with even better deals coming up on this channel right here. Thank you.